Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be talking about why is everyone swapping over to Holy Paladin. What are the reasons? I know it's overpowered, but is it fun to play? What are the new changes that happen in patch 10.1.5 to make Holy Paladin so OP and so interesting to optimize? This video is going to mainly focus on Mythiclus aspect. We'll talk about the gameplay, we'll talk about the good things, the bad things that changed from the previous patch, also the fact that Holy Paladin recently got nerfed after patch 10.1.5 was released and it's still overpowered. What are the reasons for this healer being so popular? First of all, this is my Holy Paladin. I've been playing a bit in Mythiclus and raids and things like that, and honestly I can tell you that the rework for Holy Paladin for 10.1.5 in terms of reworks for other classes, Holy Paladin rework is probably one of the best that I've seen. I think it created jealousy for every healer that's not Holy Paladin, because Holy Paladin received, you can see all the cooldowns that I have on my left side. Holy Paladin has so many different cooldowns, pretty much a cooldown for every different situation, a way to control your glimmers in order to do damage or healing. There is so much more holy power generation, multiple different abilities feel way more impactful. It kind of captured a melee healer playstyle in such a way that it feels fast to play, it feels rewarding to play, and the cooldowns feel rewarding and interesting to press, which honestly is one of the biggest. The people who don't like the rework, they usually will say, hey, there's a huge amount of buttons that I got so many buttons from the new talents. I got things like Daybreak, I got things like Hand of Divinity. I'm using Tears Deliverance all of a sudden. I have, for example, I might be using Barrier of Fate in something like raid environments or specific Mythiclus. If I'm using these abilities, I have so many more keybinds to do, and a lot of negative people or people who don't like the rework might tell you there's too much of button bloat, and I understand, I completely understand. The amount of extra keybinds that I had to get as Holy Paladin was somewhat overwhelming at the beginning, but once you get to play with these cooldowns, things like Daybreak, things like Hand of Divinity, and things like that, you'll realize that all of these buttons have a specific niche and they feel impactful to press, which is honestly really hard to achieve. Most of the time when a class has too many buttons, it doesn't feel good. For example, Holy Priest has 5 different ways of providing AoE healing, when it feels like, why not merge a couple of those abilities into one? And for Holy Paladin, it doesn't feel like that. One of the main things that I really enjoy about my Holy Paladin is the fact that there's so much emphasis on Holy Shock. You now have 2 charges of Holy Shock, and you can reduce the cooldown of Holy Shock by using imbued infusions. So if you consume Infusion of Light, then you can consume Infusion of Light with Judgment now. We'll talk about Judgment, we'll talk about controlling glimmers for damage and healing, but the general consensus, Holy Shock feels really impactful. It might be one of your top heals in raids and Mythiclus content depending on how you play. So you can reduce the cooldown of Holy Shock by consuming Infusion of Light. And on top of that, with some luck and a talent called Glorious Dawn, you can get some of these Holy Shock resets again, which scales, or the luck scales on how many Glimmer of Light you have out there, which kind of brings back the memories of Ineffable Truth, where Holy Shock you can get back to back and it just feels amazing. You're doing Mythiclus or raid content and you're an extremely reactive healer. You see someone that needs healing, you press Holy Shock and you're going to deal a lot of healing, and that's going to apply Glimmer, then you can control Glimmers. So that's the number one thing. It's an extremely reactive healer. Why is it so overpowered? Because it has tools for every single situation. And we'll talk about mainly Mythiclus. One of the reasons why Holy Paladin was really powerful before 10.1.5 is the fact that you have so much spot healing. There is so many dungeons out there that requires one person in the group takes 80% of their HP gone with a single hit, Harry Slayer and things like that. 80% of their HP is gone and you need to heal them. The best healer for the job is going to be Holy Paladin because he has an unmatched amount of spot healing available. Other healers cannot really compete with that. You have to remember, Beacon of Fate is becoming one of the main reasons or talents to play both in raids and Mythiclus. So you can put it on 2 people. It might not always be a tank, depending on which tank you're playing with, so you don't have to worry about those 2 people. You're only healing 3 other people, and you don't actually have to heal yourself, because Holy Paladin is the tankiest healer out there. The fact that things like, again, Sanctified Plates were introduced a little while ago, Holy Paladin does not, like, you're so tanky. You're not going to die from anything unless you're going to get hit by a one-shot mechanic. Holy Paladin really doesn't require too much maintenance in terms of keeping yourself alive. So with all of this in mind, you have unmatched spot healing, you have Beacon of Fate, which again provides a lot of continuous healing on whichever targets need that healing, depending on which tank you're playing. On top of that, you have cooldowns for every single situation. For example, if you need continuous healing, and we're talking about things like Halls of Infusion, third boss, we're talking about, again, the whole Vortex Pinnacle, The whole Vortex Pinnacle dungeon requires continuous healing, the second boss, third boss, and things like that. Things like Tears Deliverance has become the meta, and it actually got nerfed by 15%, but it's still insanely powerful. Tears Deliverance with Boundless Salvation means that you can have a pretty high uptime of this continuous healing. Not only of this continuous healing, but you're also getting buffs that empower your spells, which means that, again, it's extremely strong. And again, you can see this little weak aura here tells me I can extend it up to 40 seconds. There are ways to cheese this. If you go to 38 seconds of this buff, and we're gonna showcase it right now. So we have 28 seconds extension right now. So we have 38 seconds of Tears Deliverance. You can cast Holy Light, and that's gonna go to 46. So you can get 46 seconds of extensions to Tears Deliverance if you play, like, again, if you cheese it. So not only Holy Paladin has unmatched spot healing, it has good ways to provide continuous healing through things like Tears Deliverance. Again, you can extend Tears Deliverance with Boundless Salvation and things like that, but there is going to be a time where you don't have, or you won't have Tears Deliverance active, so you might have to make sure to have things like Daybreak or Divine Toll. Now, I wanted to talk about Glimmer optimization because there's a lot of, or the difference between a good Paladin or an average Paladin or an excellent Paladin is going to be how you manage your Glimmers, because I didn't see this at the start when they first were reworking Holy Paladin, but Daybreak is absolutely insane in terms of providing optimization with Glimmer. You have to remember, if you're picking talents like Illumination, with Glimmer of Light can affect 5 additional targets, means your Glimmer of Light can affect total of up to 8 targets. You can use Daybreak as a way to reset your Glimmers. Your Glimmer is going to do damage or healing based on how many targets you do. So if you only have Glimmer on this target and you're facing a boss and you want to do a bunch of damage, having Glimmer on just this one target and no other active Glimmers, you can see my weak aura is tracking how many Glimmers I have on enemies, that's the best way to deal damage. If you have Glimmers on other people, that's going to split the damage and healing. So if you're doing Mythic Plus content or raiding, but it's more applicable to Mythic Plus content because a lot of Holy Paladins like to do a juicy amount of damage. If you want to do a juicy amount of damage, you're facing like 5 or 6 enemies, you press Divine Toll, everyone gets Glimmer on them. Again, you can use Divine Toll to apply offensive or defensive Glimmers, which is another way to mix and match what you want to do. Do you want the DPS or heal? And then you have Glimmers, and again, it applied Glimmer on me because there's not enough enemies active here. You're providing an insane amount of damage on these enemy mobs. But that means in the next couple of seconds, you're like, oh, there's going to be AoE healing needs to my party. I don't want to have Glimmers on enemies. I want to make sure that my Glimmer is on friendly targets because they need healing. You can use Daybreak to remove all the Glimmers, and then you're gonna get this shotgun effect with your Rising Sunlight, and you can apply friendly Glimmers on your friendly targets to ensure that your Glimmer is going to do more healing on them, depending on which targets need it. So for example, in Mythic Plus, you might be like, I'm gonna apply Glimmers on non-beacon targets because they're gonna need more healing, my beacon targets are fine, or whatever. There's multiple ways to optimize it. That's one of the really interesting parts of Holy Paladin. You can use Daybreak to emphasize DPS or healing depending on situation. You can use Divine Toll to emphasize DPS or healing on a given situation. You can use Tears Deliverance to provide continuous healing throughout a fight with a really powerful buff. For example, the most common combination is going to be Hand of Divinity combined with Tears Deliverance for 16 additional seconds of the duration when combined with Holy Light. You're casting Hand of Divinity, you're casting Tears Deliverance, and then you're going to have, again, instant cast Holy Lights, and you can see my duration increase or extension. Holy Light, 2 instant casts, free 16 seconds. Very, very common in all forms of content for Holy Paladin. These combinations of talents have made Holy Paladin so much more interesting to play. It is still a melee healer. You still want to stay in melee because you still want to use your things like Crusader Strike, even though Crusader Strike emphasis, there's no longer 2 charges. The whole change of 10.1.5 is that you're still pressing a lot of buttons. It's still a very fast class, mainly to do with the fact that you have multiple charges of Holy Shock, and you need to, like, in raid situations, you're going to be paying attention. Who needs healing? I'm gonna Holy Shock them. So you're still pressing a lot of buttons. It's still a fast healer, especially compared to someone like Preservation of Ochre. I've been playing Preservation of Ochre, and Preservation of Ochre feels so slow compared to Holy Paladin. It is wild. So if you like this fast-paced melee healing playstyle, Holy Paladin is going to be for you, especially because most of the abilities that you're pressing right now feel impactful or they heal compared to previous patches. Because you have to look at things like, again, emphasis on Judgment. Judgment is extremely powerful right now because, for example, Judgment has multiple talent interactions. You have Graded Judgment, which is going to prevent a certain amount of damage on the target, which Again, it's very passive, very easy to use. On top of that, you can also proc Infusion of Light with Judgment, which means you're going to reduce the cooldown of your Holy Shock. And then you have talents like Righteous Judgment, which Judgment has a 50% chance to cast Consecration. And this is very important. That Consecration is not going to limit your normal Consecration. So you can have 2 active at the same time, which means that if you're doing Mythiclus content and you want to provide AoE damage, Judgment becomes one of the core abilities. And on top of that, it also provides Holy Power. If you get Infusion of Light, you can see my cooldown of Holy Shock. If you use Judgment, it's going to reduce the cooldown of Holy Shock, which means you can have more back-to-back Holy Shocks depending on, again, if you get lucky. This is why crit is becoming more and more powerful. Again, brings back memories of BFA, Ineffable Truth, Holy Paladin. I think the fact that they're emphasized so much on Holy Shock and Glimmer and things like that, it's bringing back the good old memories. Another thing that I found interesting, this might sound weird, but I think Blizzard has struck a decent balance between these hard casting abilities, because if you really wanted to, you could use things like Flash of Light in order to keep your party alive. Again, you probably won't have to hardcast many of these abilities, especially in Mythic Plus, because a lot of your other toolkit and other cooldowns can take care of group healing, but your hardcasting abilities are not deemed all that useless after 10.1.5 patch. And the main differentiating factor when it comes to Holy Paladin in Mythic Plus and Raid, when it comes to Holy Power spenders, you will be using Word of Glory in Mythic Plus, and you'll be using Light of Dawn in Raids, because it's just easier to get that max target Light of Dawns. Downsides, again, button bloat. A lot of people will talk about multiple new buttons appearing, or new talents making or becoming viable, like Tears Deliverance, and now I have to have way more buttons or keybinds. I can see where they're coming from, but I think they feel pretty impactful. A lot of people might talk about Hammer of Wrath not feeling impactful without Veneration, but Veneration is not really popular right now. I think there could be some changes made to Hammer of Wrath. A lot of people talking about your spenders, things like Light of Dawn and World of Glory might not feeling all that impactful either, but I can see how Blizzard approached this. I think this rework is almost 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 in terms of classes, because you're not really reliant on wings as much as you were before. You're doing way more healing outside of cooldowns. You can choose how to use your Glimmer of Light. I think there's a lot of emphasis or complexity in how you're going to organize or optimize your Glimmer of Light. The fact that Beacon of Fate is making a comeback makes continuous healing a lot easier, especially when tank needs healing and things like that. You can choose in a lot of situations who needs that Beacon of Fate, who needs that Glimmer of Light, and it's still fast-paced. You're still staying in melee, you're still pressing a lot of buttons, but they feel a lot more impactful. And the fact that you have a cooldown for pretty much every situation means that even if Holy Paladin gets nerfed even further, you're still having that utility, good damage, you still have good healing, because you have a button for every situation. Unmatched spot healing, unmatched burst AoE healing, unmatched, again, strong continuous healing. You pretty much cover all the bases, and in Mythic Plus that can be extremely important, because other healers might be focusing on providing more AoE healing, because that's where basically the game is going right now. Not many healers have unmatched spot healing that Holy Paladin has, and this is why I think Holy Paladin is going to continue and be very, very strong in the foreseeable future, unless Blizzard absolutely nerfs him to the ground. Like, there's just too many things to cover for Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin just does it all, and it almost makes no sense when you compare it to other healers. Just, Holy Paladin has everything right now, and this is why people are swapping to them, and not only because they're extremely strong right now, even after the nerfs, but also because they're really fun if you really like that fast-paced melee gameplay, because, again, when I say fast-paced, you're going to be pressing a lot of buttons, but a lot of those buttons are going to provide a lot of impactful healing or damage, and it feels good to press them, unlike in the previous patches. And again, guys, let me know how you feel about Holy Paladin. I'm sure I missed out a lot in terms of what makes them. Again, we didn't really talk about the utility they provide. They provide a lot of utility. If you don't like melee healing, I probably won't play Holy Paladin, because I think to really optimize Holy Paladin, you want to be melee. So that's just something to consider. But overall, I think Holy Paladin is going to dominate for the foreseeable future, unless Blizzard really does something crazy with them. This rework for me is 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. I wish other healers would receive the same kind of attention, because right now you can really tell that this class has been reworked recently.